It was supposed to be a routine evening. The sun had just begun to set, casting an amber glow over the city skyline. A group of protesters marched down the street, their voices unified in a chant for justice. Signs waved in the air, reflecting a movement that had been growing for years. Among them was Malcolm Reese, a 32-year-old community organizer and activist, known for his unwavering commitment to exposing systemic injustices. But what happened next changed everything. A police car pulled up, sirens flashing, tires screeching to a halt. Officer Daniel Carter, a 12-year veteran of the force, stepped out, his hand instinctively resting on the holster of his gun. The crowd grew tense as Carter approached Reese. "Step back," the officer ordered. "This protest is unauthorized. You're under arrest." The words rang out like a gunshot through the tense air. The crowd gasped. Phones came out, cameras rolling. Reese, calm and collected, raised his hands, his voice steady. "Officer, I'm exercising my First Amendment rights." "What's the charge?" Carter didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed Reese's wrist, twisting it behind his back. The activist didn't resist, but the crowd did. Cries of outrage filled the air. "Let him go. This is police brutality. He didn't do anything wrong." Reese was forced against the hood of the police car, his face pressed against the cold metal. The cuffs clicked around his wrists, tight and unforgiving. A sense of déjà vu washed over the crowd. Another black man in handcuffs, another moment of injustice playing out in broad daylight. But this wasn't just another arrest, because what would be revealed in the coming days would turn this entire case upside down. Malcolm Reese wasn't just an activist. He was a well-known voice in the fight against racial injustice. A former journalist turned community leader, he had spent years uncovering corruption, exposing misconduct, and holding the powerful accountable. His organization, Justice Now, had helped overturn wrongful convictions and brought national attention to cases of police brutality. Officer Daniel Carter, on the other hand, had a different reputation. To some, he was a decorated officer who had served his city with distinction. To others, he was a symbol of a system that disproportionately targeted black and brown communities. His record wasn't spotless. There were complaints of excessive force, but none had ever stuck. Their paths had crossed before. Carter had been involved in breaking up past protests organized by Reese. There was tension between them, one man demanding change, the other enforcing the law as it stood. So, when news broke that Officer Carter had arrested Malcolm Reese, the story quickly went viral. The hashtags #JusticeForReese and #FreeMalcolm started trending within hours. People demanded to know the charges. Some saw Reese as a hero wrongfully arrested, while others defended the police action, claiming he had incited an illegal gathering. But one question loomed over everything. Why was he really arrested? This wasn't just about one man in handcuffs. This case struck at the heart of a much larger issue: police accountability, racial profiling, and the right to protest. Over the past decade, high-profile cases of police brutality had ignited national debates. From George Floyd to Breonna Taylor, protests had erupted across the country, demanding reform. The relationship between law enforcement and black communities remained fraught with tension, trust eroding with each incident of excessive force. Reese's arrest was another spark in an already volatile atmosphere. The media took sides. Some news outlets framed Reese as a radical agitator, painting Carter as a cop just doing his job. Others questioned the legitimacy of the arrest, pointing out inconsistencies in the police report. Community leaders, civil rights lawyers, and politicians weighed in. Some called for an immediate investigation, while others urged patience, arguing that the full story had yet to emerge. But as the days passed, new evidence surfaced. And what was uncovered would change everything. What really happened that night? Why was Malcolm Reese singled out for arrest? Was this a case of lawful policing, or was something more sinister at play? As the investigation unfolds, shocking details come to light. Hidden body cam footage, eyewitness testimony, and a trail of evidence that suggests this wasn't just an arrest, it was a setup. And in the end, the truth would shake the entire city to its core. Within hours of Malcolm Reese's arrest, social media erupted. Videos of the incident circulated rapidly, sparking outrage and debate. News outlets picked up the footage, dissecting every angle, every second. Some called it a blatant violation of First Amendment rights, while others framed it as the justified arrest of an activist disrupting public order. Outside the police station, a crowd began to gather. Protesters, journalists, and legal representatives demanded answers. But the police department remained tight-lipped. The official statement was brief. Malcolm Reese was arrested on charges of disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. No further comment at this time. Disorderly conduct? Resisting arrest? Those who had witnessed the incident firsthand knew that wasn't true. Reese hadn't resisted. He had barely spoken before being placed in handcuffs. But the damage was done. He was booked, processed, and held without bail overnight. The next morning, his attorney, Lisa Hammond, a fierce civil rights lawyer, held a press conference. This is an attack on free speech, plain and simple. Malcolm Reese was exercising his constitutional rights when he was wrongfully arrested. We demand the immediate release of all footage related to this arrest, and we will not rest until justice is served. Hammond's words added fuel to the fire. Calls flooded the mayor's office. Activists vowed to shut down city streets if Reese wasn't released. The tension was rising fast, but something still wasn't adding up. As journalists and independent investigators dug deeper, inconsistencies in the official police report emerged. The report claimed Reese had been aggressive and refused to comply with orders. But the video footage showed otherwise. He had remained calm, his hands visible at all times. It alleged that he had tried to incite a riot. But witnesses refuted this claim, stating that the protest was peaceful until the police intervened. The biggest red flag? The officer who filed the report was not the one who had made the arrest. Officer Carter had been the one to place Reese in handcuffs, but the official report was filed by another officer, Sergeant William Rourke, a name that would soon become central to the case. Why was Carter not the one documenting the arrest? And why was Reese, a man with no history of violence, suddenly being portrayed as a dangerous agitator? That's when another piece of information surfaced, one that changed the entire trajectory of the case. A whistleblower from inside the department, an officer who wished to remain anonymous, came forward. He claimed that just hours before Reese's arrest, Carter and Sergeant Rourke had met privately in a back office at the precinct. They were overheard discussing Reese by name. "He's getting too loud. We need to handle it. Handle it." The phrase sent chills down the spine of anyone who heard it. What did that mean? Was this arrest premeditated? Reese's legal team seized on this revelation, filing an emergency motion to obtain all body cam footage from the officers present that night. They demanded access to any internal communications related to Reese in the days leading up to the arrest. The police department pushed back, refusing to release the footage, citing an ongoing investigation. But by then, the damage was done. The public wasn't buying the official story. Protests intensified. Calls for transparency grew louder. Even city officials began to question the department's handling of the case. And then, just when it seemed like things couldn't get more suspicious, someone leaked the footage. A local news outlet received an anonymous email containing unedited body cam footage from Officer Carter's uniform. They aired it that evening. The footage didn't just contradict the official report, it exposed a lie. In the video, Carter could be seen approaching Reese, not to de-escalate, but to provoke. His tone was sharp, his stance aggressive. "This ends tonight," Carter muttered under his breath, barely audible. Then came the moment that shook the city. Just before placing Reese under arrest, Carter glanced toward a fellow officer, a silent nod, as if confirming something. Seconds later, he grabbed Reese's wrist. The video cut off, but that was enough. A simple glance, a nod. It was subtle, but damning. It suggested prior coordination, a premeditated move to remove Reese from the streets. Within an hour, the footage was everywhere. The city was on edge. The footage raised serious questions. Why was Carter so determined to arrest Reese? What did that nod mean? Was this a personal vendetta, or something bigger? People demanded action. Civil rights organizations called for an independent investigation. The mayor, previously silent, issued a statement urging the police department to release all remaining footage. And then came the final bombshell. An investigative journalist uncovered an email exchange between Carter and Sergeant Rourke from 2 days before the arrest. The subject line? Reese situation. The contents were even more damning. Rourke had written, If we don't get him now, he's going to be a bigger problem later. Make sure it's clean. Make sure it's clean. The words were chilling. It was proof of intent, suggesting Reese's arrest wasn't about disorderly conduct at all. It was about silencing him. With this revelation, the case exploded. People weren't just calling for Reese's release anymore. They were calling for Carter's arrest. This wasn't just another case of police misconduct. This was something deeper, something systematic. Reese was no longer just an activist. He was now a symbol. His arrest had exposed something bigger than one incident. It revealed the inner workings of a deliberate effort to silence dissent. And now, the people wanted justice. But with tensions at an all-time high, one question remained. Would the system hold its own accountable? Or would this be another case of power protecting itself? Only time would tell. By now, the arrest of Malcolm Reese had become a national headline. News anchors dissected the leaked footage, legal analysts debated the implications, and social media was ablaze with theories and demands. The pressure on the police department was immense. The mayor, initially hesitant to interfere, was forced to order an internal review of the arrest. But many suspected this was just a public relations move to buy time. Meanwhile, Lisa Hammond and Reese's legal team weren't waiting around. They launched their own independent investigation, determined to expose the full truth. And what they found was even worse than expected. Digging into Officer Carter's past, the first place they looked? Daniel Carter's disciplinary record. On paper, Carter was a decorated officer. Multiple commendations. Years of service. A model cop, at least, according to official reports. But beneath the surface, the story was different. After digging through internal records and speaking with former colleagues, Hammond's team discovered a disturbing pattern. 7 complaints of excessive force, all dismissed. 4 allegations of racial profiling, none investigated. 1 previous lawsuit, settled out of court, with a strict gag order. And then, the biggest discovery. Carter had a history with Reese. 2 years prior, Reese had led an investigation into police misconduct in the city. He had helped expose a fraudulent overtime scandal that implicated several officers, including none other than Daniel Carter. Though Carter had avoided punishment, many believed Reese's reporting had ended his chances for promotion. Now, the question was clear. Was Reese's arrest an act of retaliation? The cover-up unravels. As Hammond's team continued their investigation, they made another shocking discovery. An anonymous source from inside the department, this time a high-ranking official, leaked a second, unedited version of the bodycam footage. What made this footage different? It contained several minutes of audio that had been removed from the first leak. In those missing minutes, Sergeant Rourke could be heard giving Carter a direct order. Make sure he's off the streets tonight. Whatever it takes. The full weight of the conspiracy was now in the open. This wasn't just a wrongful arrest. It was a coordinated effort to remove a vocal activist by any means necessary. And it was all caught on tape. With the evidence now too damning to ignore, the district attorney's office announced they were opening a formal criminal investigation into the officers involved. Publicly, they stated that they would conduct a fair and thorough review. Privately, sources revealed that prosecutors were already considering charges. For the first time, there was real fear inside the department. Retaliation and fear. As the investigation progressed, Reese's supporters celebrated the momentum. But behind the scenes, Reese and his legal team faced increasing threats. Anonymous phone calls warning them to back off. Unmarked cars parked outside Reese's home. A break-in at Lisa Hammond's office, where only case-related files were taken. It was clear. Someone was trying to silence them. But Reese refused to back down. They tried to shut me up once. It didn't work. It won't work now. His words only strengthened the movement. Protesters grew louder. Investigators dug deeper. The pressure on city officials became unbearable. And then, the final piece of evidence surfaced. The ultimate proof, the deleted emails. A former IT specialist from the police department came forward with a bombshell revelation. Just one day after Reese's arrest, several emails between Carter, Rourke, and other high-ranking officials had been deleted from the system. Using forensic recovery software, the IT specialist was able to retrieve fragments of those emails. One of them was a direct order from Rourke to Carter, sent just hours before the arrest. The message was short. Make sure Reese gets the message tonight. No loose ends. No loose ends. The intent was clear. This wasn't law enforcement. This was an orchestrated takedown. The tipping point. With this final piece of evidence, the case reached a boiling point. The mayor was forced to suspend Officer Carter and Sergeant Rourke. The city council demanded a full independent probe into police corruption. The governor called for a statewide review of police misconduct cases. And then, in a move that shocked the entire country, the district attorney announced, "We are filing criminal charges against Officer Daniel Carter and Sergeant William Rourke for conspiracy, misconduct, and falsifying official reports." For the first time in years, the system was holding its own accountable. Reese's fight had become something bigger than himself. It was a battle for justice, transparency, and the truth. But the fight wasn't over yet, because what happened next would determine whether true change was possible, or if this was just another temporary victory in a broken system. The arrests that shook the city. The day Officer Carter and Sergeant Rourke were taken into custody was a defining moment. The image of two uniformed officers being led away in handcuffs was broadcast across every major news network. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse, some cheering, some skeptical. For many, this was the first time they had ever seen officers actually face consequences for their actions. But Reese knew better than to celebrate too soon. An arrest isn't a conviction, he reminded his supporters. We've seen too many cases where officers walk free despite overwhelming evidence. We need to stay vigilant. He was right. Within hours of the arrests, the police union issued a statement condemning the charges, calling them politically motivated and an attack on law enforcement. They promised to fight for Carter and Rourke, funding their legal defense with millions of dollars in union resources. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. With the case now heading to trial, Reese and his team shifted their focus from fighting a single arrest to something much bigger. Systemic change. They formed the Justice for All Coalition, a grassroots organization demanding police accountability, independent investigations, and legislative reform. Their demands were clear. A new civilian oversight board with power to investigate misconduct. Mandatory body cam footage releases within 72 hours of any use of force incident. Elimination of qualified immunity for officers accused of misconduct. The coalition gained momentum fast. Within weeks, thousands had signed petitions, businesses pledged funding, and lawmakers were forced to acknowledge the movement. But the police department fought back. The chief of police resigned under pressure, blaming anti-police hysteria. The union launched an aggressive counter-campaign, warning that officers might start hesitating in dangerous situations if new reforms were passed. The battle for reform became a war of narratives, and Malcolm Reese was now the face of it. The trial that changed everything. 6 months after Reese's arrest, the trial of Officer Carter and Sergeant Rourke began. The prosecution laid out a devastating case. The body cam footage showing Carter's coordinated takedown of Reese. The deleted emails exposing a conspiracy to silence a political activist. The whistleblower testimony revealing officers discussing Reese before his arrest. The defense tried every tactic in the book, claiming Carter had only followed orders, that Reese was a known agitator, that the evidence was misconstrued. But the public wasn't buying it. When Malcolm Reese took the stand, he spoke with conviction. "This isn't about me. It's about the system that let this happen. If we don't hold these officers accountable, what stops it from happening again? To someone else? To your family? To your friends?" His testimony resonated across the country. And then came the verdict. After 5 days of deliberation, the jury returned with a decision that would make history. "We, the jury, find the defendants guilty." The courtroom erupted. Outside, crowds cheered and cried. For the first time, a system that had long protected its own had delivered real accountability. But Reese wasn't done. Because a verdict wasn't enough. Laws had to change. Legislation and the beginning of reform. With the momentum of the trial, activists and lawmakers pushed harder for police reform laws. Within a year, 3 major policies were passed. 1. The Reese Act, mandating independent investigations for all police misconduct cases. 2. The Carter Rule, requiring all police officers to release unedited body cam footage within 48 hours of an incident. 3. The Rourke Accountability Bill, ending qualified immunity for officers involved in proven misconduct cases. These weren't just symbolic wins. They changed the law. They changed the system. And it all started because one man refused to be silenced. The personal toll. Despite the victory, Reese paid a heavy price. He had spent months in legal battles, endured death threats, lost close friends who were afraid of the backlash. His reputation had been dragged through the mud. His life would never be the same. But when asked if it was worth it, he simply said, "If speaking the truth makes you a target, then the system is the problem, not me." And with that, he moved forward. Because his fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. A movement bigger than one man. Malcolm Reese never set out to be a symbol. He never wanted to be a martyr for justice, nor did he expect his name to become a rallying cry. Yet, here he was, no longer just an activist, but a catalyst for change. 1 year after his arrest, the ripple effects of his case were still being felt. Police departments across the country were reviewing their misconduct policies. Local governments were passing new oversight laws. Community-led policing initiatives were emerging, shifting power away from traditional law enforcement models. But it wasn't just policy. It was culture. For the first time, communities that had felt unheard for decades were seeing real accountability. The message was clear. The people had power, and they weren't afraid to use it. While Carter and Rourke sat in prison, the department they once served was forced into radical reform. Under public pressure, the city fired 12 more officers with histories of misconduct. Internal Affairs reopened over 50 closed cases of excessive force, many of which led to new investigations. The new police chief, a reform-minded leader appointed after the scandal, issued a stark warning. This department will no longer protect those who break the law while wearing a badge. It was a powerful statement. But Reese knew words were nothing without action. Would the changes stick? Or would the system find a way to protect itself again once the cameras were gone? That was the question on everyone's mind. Reese's next fight. Despite the landmark trial and new laws, Reese knew that one victory didn't mean the war was won. He had seen it happen before, how attention fades, how the system adapts to survive change without actually changing. That's why he didn't stop. With the Justice for All coalition, he shifted his focus from just protesting police brutality to rebuilding trust between communities and law enforcement. One of his biggest initiatives? Civilian-led safety programs. Instead of relying solely on police, his coalition advocated for community responders trained in de-escalation, mental health crises, and conflict resolution. It was a new way forward, one that reduced unnecessary police encounters while ensuring public safety. And in the cities that adopted it, the results were undeniable. Crime rates didn't rise. Trust between residents and law enforcement improved. Fewer people, especially Black and marginalized individuals, were subjected to excessive force. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. The personal cost of change. While Reese had become a national figure, his personal life had suffered. The constant threats never truly stopped. Security had become a necessity, not a precaution. His legal battles had drained him financially, even as donations poured in. And worst of all, he had lost friends along the way. Some thought he had become too radical. Others thought he wasn't radical enough. The weight of being a symbol was heavy, and at times, lonely. But he reminded himself why he started. It was never about fame, never about power. It was about justice. And as long as the fight remained unfinished, he would keep going. The legacy of a fight for justice. 2 years after his wrongful arrest, Malcolm Reese stood on the steps of City Hall, addressing a crowd of thousands. He looked out at the faces, young and old, Black and white, activists and ordinary citizens. People who had once felt powerless but now knew they weren't alone. 2 years ago, they thought they could silence me, he said. They thought they could make me disappear. But we proved them wrong. We showed them that the truth is louder than any lie, stronger than any system built on injustice. A roar of applause. This fight isn't over. It won't be over until every system that protects abuse is dismantled. But if we've learned anything, it's this. When we stand together, when we refuse to be afraid, we can change the world. It was a statement of defiance, a statement of hope, and a promise that the fight for justice would never be silenced again. Final reflection. Malcolm Reese's story wasn't just about one man versus one corrupt officer. It was about a system that had failed too many people for too long. It was about the power of truth, the power of resistance, the power of ordinary people refusing to accept injustice as normal. His arrest had been meant to break him. Instead, It built a movement that outlived the headlines, a movement that changed laws, changed lives, and changed the course of history. And as long as injustice existed, that movement would continue. Because Malcolm Rees wasn't fighting alone anymore. The world had finally started to listen.